Morning, Matt.
Morning.
We are getting together to talk today about SAMsARA's and your journey with Chardonnay, the origin story, the philosophy that began in 2017 and carries through to today. To give us a little background, from your perspective, how's California Chardonnay's style evolved since the 1980s? Uh, Many people think of buttery, heavily oaked, classic California Chards. What did winemakers and drinkers learn from that era? And how did those trends influence the way you wanted to make Chardonnay at SAMsARA?
There's a bunch in there. Those are all good questions. It just occurred to me as you were asking the question, I probably had a little bit of, you know, 1983 vintage Chardonnay when I was in the womb, because that was kind of my mom's go-to drink. Not when she was pregnant, I'm kidding, but she probably snuck a sip in there, once or twice. Um, Obviously I wasn't around in the very early stages of California Chardonnay and its evolution, but having had a few of those wines over the years, I think in the very beginning of California Chardonnay and California winemaking in general, the wines were pretty classic. Not stylistically that different than what winemakers were doing in Europe and all over the world. Um, I think it wasn't uncommon for oak to be used in Chardonnay. But I do think those kind of early California vintages, uh, you didn't see the sky high alcohol levels or the super high levels of ripeness. They were kind of a little bit more classic in style. And then that evolved over time. And, when I entered my wine drinking years and in my early years making wine in Santa Barbara, um, bless you, kind of the early 2000s, the style had definitely started to shift. In the 90s, people are experimenting with maybe higher levels of oak, increasing levels of ripeness. But the era of super ripe wines in California, I feel like, kind of began right as I was starting my wine career in the mid 2000s. And that's when you saw, like, especially out of Northern California and Russian River, kind of those uber ripe styles with high alcohol levels, higher percentages of new oak. I mean, you see that a little bit with some producers in Santa Rita Hills and Santa Barbara County from that era, but kind of in step with just the trends of bigger, riper, higher alcohol wines across the board with everything, in that era. That was kind of the Robert Parker era where, big, super powerful, high alcohol wines were really rewarded in the press, and it did shift the pendulum. More in that, super right, boozy direction, bigger direction. And in the time since, in the 20 years since that, we've seen a lot of things. We saw the pendulum swing back the other way with the whole in pursuit of balance movement, Raj Par's thing, this whole movement to not produce or work with wines that were over 14% alcohol. And then that got a little too extreme. And I think now it's really an exciting time because you see a real variety of styles. There certainly are people like Rombauer and the Rombauers of the world making big, buttery, higher alcohol, riper wines. You see people doing stainless steel Chardonnays and really lean, acid-driven wines, and then kind of everything in between. And I think for Samsara, we really try to be right smack dab in the middle of that, and really shoot for balanced, elegant wines. But we do want all the richness and depth and texture and all the good stuff about Chardonnay that we love, just with an element of finesse and balance and restraint and elegance.
Perfect. Take us back to 2017. SAMsARA had never made a white wine before. What did you and the SAMsARA owners, Dave and Joan Skutak, what did you see in the marketplace or in Santa Barbara at that time that convinced you that to make a Chardonnay? And were there specific wines or personal preferences that inspired the style that you were going for?
Yeah. There's some interesting things to say on all that. I don't know that we did a lot of market consideration when we launched the Chardonnay program. It really wasn't driven by, oh wow, there's a demand for this and we can sell more wine this way. I think the genesis of it was really, we want white wine to make and drink at Samsara. There had never been any white wines produced before 2017. And, me personally, the food that I like to eat, the wines that I like to drink typically are white wines and white wine friendly food. So it came from purely selfish reasons, and I know Joan and Dave feel this way too, because they drink a lot of white wine as well, and kind of have a similar diet with, lighter style foods. And then beyond that, it was just really obvious through wines that we love from other producers in Santa Rita Hills and in our area that Santa Rita Hills is extremely well suited for Chardonnay. The proximity to the ocean, the salinity, the acidity, the naturally super high acidity, the long hang time, the freshness, the ancient marine bed soils that give us so much soil complexity and minerality. Those are all special, unique things to our area. And, Pinot is king in Santa Rita Hills, but you could really make a case that Chardonnay is the varietal that's best suited for the terroir of Santa Rita.
You touched on this a little bit, but are there flavors or textures that you get in Santa Rita Hills Chardonnay that you don't see in warmer areas?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, I think the special sauce, the magic of our area is this long hang time that we get in Santa Rita Hills, and so you can make these really moderately ripe, balanced, balanced styles of everything, but Chardonnay especially. And and what that allows you is you're not obscuring any of the nuance of the site or the terroir, by overripeness. We're able to pick at, we'll get finished alcohols for our Chardonnays anywhere from 12 to 13 and a half. So really moderate, levels of ripeness at harvest. And I think that allows for some of the more nuanced complexities of the wine and all that site driven stuff, the minerality, the little bit of brine that you get from the proximity to the ocean, that savoriness that gets your mouth watering, even with the white wines. That's all stuff that could be obscured by over picking too ripe or using new oak and having a more oak driven profile. And so, the whole goal with all the Samsara wines is to let the site shine through and make vineyard driven wines, and we really kind of celebrate those nuances and try to make the wine in a way that allows the nuanced part of the wine to really shine and drive the complexity of the wine.
Very cool. So I know that Samsara hadn't made a white wine before 2017. Also, am I also correct in saying that you hadn't made a white wine before 2017?
No, we made a bunch of white wine at Jaffers. I made tons of Rhone varietals, and I hadn't made Chardonnay before 2017.
Okay, that's it.
Well, actually, that's not true either because we did make a little Chardonnay a couple times.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then in my early years at Jaffers, my good friends over at Whitcraft Winery, um, they're famously an unplugged winery where they don't have pumps or any equipment that runs on electricity. Although that's changed a little bit now because I think they have a new press. But every now and then their Chardonnays wouldn't finish malolactic fermentation, and they would require filtration. So I would bring the filter over from my previous winery at Jaffers and hang out in the cellar with the Whitcraft guys for a day and help them work on their Chardonnay. So that was really my first kind of, up close and personal experience with Chardonnay that even predated side projects we did at Jaffers later on. But I was always, Whitcraft makes some of my favorite wines in Santa Barbara, and I've always been inspired by their winemaking, and a lot of the winemaking techniques and approaches that we use with Chardonnay, we kind of borrowed from our friends over at Whitcraft.
Fantastic. Um, Looking back on that first vintage versus now, what have you learned, and have you changed anything in your winemaking? For example, have you adjusted how long you age the wine, or whether you do more or less lees stirring? If you
Yeah.
introduce new equipment or techniques, maybe you've started working with different vineyards since then, since that initial year, and how have those things influenced your approach or your learning curve?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much yes to all those questions. It's been a constant evolution. This will be vintage number 9 this year in 2025, making Chardonnay. We started, I think in 17, we made a total of 200 cases. And now it's about 30% of our total production, 25% of our total production, maybe. So it's grown significantly in production and with vineyard partners. We have 5 vineyard partners for Chardonnay currently. Um, as far as the winemaking evolution, yeah, we started out doing shorter barrel aging and trying to get each vintage to bottle in time for the next vintage. It's a little counterintuitive because we're on that schedule with Pinot Noir, for instance. We bottle the Pinot after about 10 or 11 months in barrel, and that we do that for the benefit of the wine, but it also frees up the barrels for the next vintage. So there's an operational element to it too.
True.
But for the Chardonnay, we've really found that extra time in barrel, we experimented, I think, starting in 2019, with doing some longer barrel aging. And we found that the Chardonnay, it's counterintuitive because you would think the reds need longer aging than the whites, but the extra barrel age really concentrates the flavors of the Chardonnay. It helps us build the richness and the weight of the wine. And I think for our style of Chardonnay, because we are picking reasonably early for natural acidity and for freshness, and to not obscure the rest of the wine with over ripeness, like we were just talking about. But we still want like all the things that Chardonnay lovers love about Chardonnay. That's the weight, the texture, the richness, the mouthfeel, the doughiness that Chardonnay can have. And so to maximize that and to build that, the extra barrel aging was really a huge step forward. In addition to that, we stir the lees of the wine, so all the solids that kind of sink to the bottom in the barrel during primary fermentation. When the wine's fermenting, it's kind of an anaerobic environment for the wine. So CO2 is being produced by fermentation, and that's protecting the wine from oxygen. And so while the wine's fermenting during primary fermentation, we're taking advantage of that protected environment because there's no oxygen in the barrel, and we're stirring the lees daily to get the solids in suspension with the wine. There's some benefits to the fermentation for that too, because there's all the good bacteria and yeast that are down in the solids. Um, but it also helps build the texture and the weight of the wine, because at the end of the day, we want the wine to be, bright and crisp and fresh and all that, but also have the elements of Chardonnay, that varietal character, the richness, the depth, the weight. And so everything we can do to build that element is a positive thing. And in more recent vintages, starting in 2022, we experimented with foot treading the Chardonnay before pressing. Typically, we would go direct to press with the Chardonnay, and that's really the primary difference between making white wine and red wine. Is white wine, you're fermenting the juice. Red wine, you're fermenting the whole grape, or in our case, for our red wine production, the whole cluster in many cases. The foot stomping and foot treading the Chardonnay directly before it went in the press was something we experimented with to see if that would build more texture and more weight. And we really liked the results. We did that on a trial basis in 2022 with Zodovich Vineyard. And then in 2023, we did it with everything. We kind of put all our chips in on that one. But I'm really, really stoked on the 23s. We bottled the 23 Chardonnays. We bottled most of them this spring. We bottled our last one just a couple weeks ago. So 20 months in barrel for that last one. Um, but I think the goal of making these really like bright, racy, crisp, fresh Chardonnays, the kind of wines that have the acid profile that appeal to people who maybe typically don't like Chardonnay. Um, we want that acid in there, but we also want everything else. And so the foot treading's been really successful in kind of building that element of the wine.
Cool. And if you were today to do a side by side of, say the 2017 vintage and the 2023 vintage, what would you find there in terms of difference? Obviously, there's going to be some stylistic similarities, but um, what would we
Yeah,
find?
I think they would be more similar than different, because the winemaking hasn't, even though it's evolved, it hasn't changed. I think the 23 and the current Chardonnays being produced do have a little bit more weight and a little bit more texture, um, and just a little bit broader in mouthfeel, and that's something that some producers achieve with ripeness, some producers achieve with new oak. We're exploring foot treading and this minimal, 1 to 2 hours of skin contact, so it doesn't alter the color of the wine. Maybe there's a tiny itsy bitsy bit of tannin in there, but it's really hard to perceive. But it has been really interesting. I think it adds a lot of complexity and just this whole other dimension of the wine.
Yeah, it sounds like going from the big butter bombs of the 80s and 90s, maybe early 2000s, to what was happening in 2017. It sounds like there was a bit of a trend occurring in Santa Barbara County specifically. Are there any other producers who you feel like are really philosophically similar, or who were kind of on the same train at the same time, that you draw inspiration from, or feel a kinship with based on these stylistic similarities?
Yeah, definitely. I mentioned Whitcraft already. I love their wines. They do a Zodovich Vineyard Chardonnay also, and I always joke that we pick one day after them so that they can get the good sample number for us. Um, and so their wines are great. I love the Sandy wines. They do a really good job. We're always next to them at a lot of the wine festivals because Samsara and Sandy are so close alphabetically. So that's always a treat when that happens, and I get to taste some of their Chardonnays. They work with some of the same vineyards as we do. They do a great Bent Rock Vineyard Chardonnay. That's one of the best wines produced in the county.
Hmm.
I love the. I've always liked the Tyler Chardonnays, and I think that style. That's even a little. They're really acid forward, just like we are.
Hmm.
But I think having them, seeing their success and seeing how focused their style is, really gave me a lot of confidence in the style that we have at Samsara. That there's a market for these kind of Chablis style Chardonnays that are really bright and acid driven. I love the Hilt wines as well. Radiant and Bent Rock Vineyards are two of our favorite sites, and the Hilt estate wines are wonderful, and they're made a little differently. I think they use a pretty sizable chunk of new oak, but it's made in a style that's still not oak driven, and the oak's so well integrated it plays a role without dominating the wine. And I think uh, that's a hard needle to thread. They do a good job at it.
With with big names like the Hilt and Whitcraft, Tyler, Samsara, all moving in this direction or kind of following this same philosophical through line. Um, do you think it's what do you think's driving that? Is it winemaker preference? Is it consumer demand? Or is it simply that the Santa Rita Hills, or Santa Barbara County at large, is really predisposed to making great wines in that style?
I think that's a big part of it. That your last point is our region is just so well suited for this style of wine. It doesn't need any, the wines don't need any help from overripeness or oak. They really speak for themselves. I'm trying to remember the first part of your question. Sorry.
Winemaker preference, consumer demand.
Consumer demand, yeah. So the consumer demand, uh, I think that's something that almost followed the style. And we get it a lot at Samsara in the tasting room and when I'm on the road doing wine dinners or out showing the wines, in different markets. Um, there are a lot of folks out there who think they don't like Chardonnay. And, there's this association with, the kind of wine your mom or grandma maybe drank, 20, 30 years ago. And it was this big, riper style, oaky or buttery style and a softer style too. They were often kind of sweet and flabby. And, I think there's a lot of momentum right now in the wine market with Sancerre and Sauvignon Blanc, and the freshness and the acid profile that folks get out of those wines. I think you can find that acidity and freshness with Santa Rita Hills Chardonnay. And so, even though the grapes are different and everything about it's different from Sauvignon Blanc to Chardonnay, I think it is kind of a reasonable jump for a lot of wine consumers who like that, fresh, bright style, but want something with a little bit more body than, like a Pinot Grigio or um, Sauvignon Blanc. Yeah,
Do you you touched on a little bit about people who say I don't like Chardonnay. They're really closed off to it. Do you have a specific anecdote of a time when you ran across somebody who you were able to turn their head to Chardonnay with the
to to, con-
style that's completely different?
convert them to the Church of Chardonnay.
Yeah,
Uh, I don't know. I must. I mean, I feel like it's happened so many times that it doesn't stand out because it happens. And certainly, every time I'm on the road selling wine, we'll hit one account, one restaurant, or one wine store where the buyer professes their distaste for Chardonnay before we even get started, and then that ends up being the wine that they buy. Because they're like, "Wow, I don't like Chardonnay, and so many of my customers don't like Chardonnay, but I love this wine." So it's really cool, and it happens consistently. I'll have to get back to you on a specific story, or maybe I'll just make one up for next time.
yeah.
But it does happen very consistently.
Okay. We talked a little bit about the other producers who you think are doing a great job. Um, is it something that you guys are all just doing independent of each other, or is there talk about do you guys get together and taste and talk and
Yeah,
and kick it
yeah,
around?
yeah, definitely. There's a lot of. I feel like there are open channels of communication. In fact, I sadly was on the sales road last week and I missed this, but Matt Dees from the Hilt and Radian and Bent Rock Vineyard hosted a winemaker roundtable at the winery where everybody could get together, taste each other's wines, and collectively try to learn a little bit more and better understand the sites. And I think that's a unique, you definitely see that in all wine producing regions of the world, but we see it at a really high level here in Santa Barbara County. Just the level of cooperation and the transparency that all these wineries have that we have here at Samsara, where there aren't any secrets or tricks or bells and whistles. It's really, the more that we can all better understand these vineyards and the winemaking and what we're doing, we got to kind of help each other to lift the collective bar. um and a lot of the tricks that I just said we don't have any tricks. I'll reel that back in. A lot of the things that we do here at Samsara are little techniques and ideas that we've borrowed from our friends at these other wineries. One of the challenges we have with Chardonnay is the malolactic fermentation, which is the secondary fermentation. It's really not a fermentation; it's a conversion of the malic acid in the wine to lactic acid. So it goes from being tart like an apple to soft like milk or yogurt. That's a really slow process in Santa Rita Hills, and it's often uh, the malolactics often don't finish completely unless you kind of nudge them along the way. So we use native yeast for all our primary fermentations, native malolactic for the malolactic conversion. But one of the tricks that I got from Matt Dees was, hey, all your lees, all the solids that are at the bottom of the barrel have this great bacteria in them, and you might have one vineyard that hasn't finished malolactic, but you've got another one that did. You can steal that good bacteria out of the lees and the solids and add it to those other barrels. And so that's something that we've been doing for the last couple of years, where when we bottle, like we just bottled the 2023 vintage Chardonnays earlier this year,
Hmm.
we captured all the lees, and we're going to use that to top the 2024 Chardonnays for the next couple months. And so every time we have to add a little bit of wine to the barrel due to evaporation to keep the barrels nice and full, for the Chardonnays, we're going to add, excuse me, the solids from the previous vintage because it has all that good bacteria in it. And it's going to help the wines go through malolactic. We also move the barrels outside during the summer to help them warm up. Our summer really just started like last week here in Goleta because the June gloom starts in April or May, and it doesn't finish till July, or at least this year that's how it went. Um, but we'll start moving the Chardonnay barrels outside every day to help warm them up, and that helps move them along with malolactic. So, and even the foot treading, that's something that I talked with my buddy Nico, who makes wine in Northern California. They run all their Chardonnay through a crusher before it goes in the press, which to me is a little too aggressive, but I loved the idea of it and the concept to build texture and build mouthfeel. So we kind of adapted that idea into the foot treading approach, and that's been really successful for us.
Um, so are there any experiments on the horizon that things that you've picked up that you haven't used yet that you're thinking about using or doing a test or
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna find one of my goals for this year for 2025 is to fine tune our foot treading program, and maybe not do all of it in that style, and have similar to our red wines where we have a destemmed component and a whole cluster component. Maybe there's an opportunity for more complexity, not doing it all the same way. In the past with previous vintages, we did all of it direct to press. This last year, we did all of it foot tread before pressing. Maybe there's some magic in the middle. And so that's what we're going to explore this year. We also have a new vineyard that we're working with. We're working with La Rinconada, which is one of the sister vineyards to Sanford and Benedict. And that was really great that we were able to secure a spot in Rinconada. And I love the wines that Sanford's producing as well. Actually, when we went up there to pick out our block at Rinconada, I met with Trey, the winemaker up there, and tasted through all of the Rinconada Chardonnays that they have. Everything, all the different clones and blocks in barrel. And, they were really kind and let SAMsARA select, whatever we wanted basically out of the vineyard. But it was really cool. I mean, that's a great way to select a block, is tasting, everything that comes out of that vineyard with the winemaker and talking about it and asking questions, and, really zeroing in on the profile that we like best.
yeah, that's very exciting.
We've got the coldest little slice of that vineyard for the Chardonnay, for the SAMsARA Chardonnay. So that's exciting, I think.
Excellent. Um, I guess to wrap up, if you could pour one Chardonnay to a skeptic to show them what Santa Rita Hills is all about, which one would it be and why? It could be one of yours, of course. It could be someone else's. It could be a particular vintage or not.
Well, we're in the wine selling business, so I'll select a Samsara wine. I mean, I think the Bent Rock Vineyard Chardonnay that we make is so special, and it captures everything that I love about Santa Rita Hills and just kind of turns it up a notch. You know, there's a lot of acidity, a lot of minerality, a lot of richness. Just a super complex site, and the wine is just crushable and delicious. And you know, we wax poetic about complexity and all these different elements of the wine that go into it, but at the end of the day, it's got to be a yummy beverage. And the Zodovich Chardonnay, it's got that quality where it kind of gets your mouth watering. I'm sorry, the Bent Rock Chardonnay, where it gets your mouth watering, and it has that, you know, as soon as you have a sip, it kind of gets you coming back for more, which is a quality I love in wine. Um, so yeah, that's probably the one for me.
Very cool. Um, It'd be interesting. Do you know if there are any customer facing kind of roundtable discussions or Chardonnay specific tastings in Santa Rita Hills that occur or have occurred in the past?
Um, That's a good question. I mean, we've done some really cool tastings with the World of Pinot Noir event,
Hmm.
um, which happens, you know, each, I guess, in February each year or early March around here. Um, a couple of years ago, we did a Samsara and Hilt seminar at World of Pinot where we tasted Bent Rock and Radiant Vineyard wines, and it was really fun um, to talk with Matt Dees from the Hilt, and Matt Ketman from Wine Enthusiast moderated it. It was triple Matt. But it was really cool, and I think the crowd really dug it. You know, people were almost surprised at how much they enjoyed the wines, and I feel that that's the response we get. Um, you know, oftentimes when we bring these wines out, because again, Santa Rita is defined by Pinot Noir, and you get the Chardonnays in front of people, and maybe they haven't had them before, and you know, they'll knock your socks off.
That's great. Very cool. Well, I've learned a lot today. I really appreciate you spending the time to go through this Chardonnay program for us. Maybe one of these days there'll be another public facing event where we can get some wines together and have a real encyclopedia of Santa Rita Hills Chardonnay.
That'd be great. Yeah, we didn't even touch on how we use it for our sparkling program, so we'll have to keep that in the back pocket for our next talk.
Sounds good.
Cool. All
All
right.
right.
Thanks, Miles.